Hello and welcome to the Purpose Pursuit podcast hosted by me, Hannah Miller. If you're new around here, this podcast is designed to simply help you thrive in your everyday life and live a little bit more on purpose. And today's episode is one that's really personal to me, and I know it is to lots of people that I work with. And it's about the subject of emotions and sensitivity. Empathy comes into it, but actually empathy is more about how we feel about others as well as ourselves. But it is for the feelers. It's for those of us that are aware that we're sensitive, we feel the whole range of emotions, and it's particularly for those who wish that they weren't so emotional. I wonder whether you're listening and you've ever wished you weren't so sensitive or that you didn't feel things as much as you do. It has been part of my story over many, many years. The people that know me best will know that I have said to them, I wish I didn't feel things as much as I do. I wish I wasn't so sensitive. I've said it to my closest friends. I've said it to my husband, my children, my sister. I just wish I didn't feel things as much as I do. And honestly, it's probably only been in the last couple of years that I've started to see things a bit differently. I've always known it's good to feel. I've never wanted to be somebody who doesn't feel, but I've sometimes felt like this is part of me that is a hindrance and is seen as a hindrance by others. I think some people listening today will know that they are more of a feeler, and other people have seen that as a weakness. And if you're listening to this today and you're not particularly a feeler, I would love you to stay tuned in, because you will have people in your life who are more emotional and more sensitive. And I would love to give you a way of understanding them better. And if you are on the more emotional side of life, stay tuned too, because I want you to see it in a new way today. I want you to be able to appreciate this part of who you are wholly and completely. Now, when we talk about empathy, just to quickly cover that, empathy is much more about the feelings that we have about other people. We can have empathy towards ourselves. It is that ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes. It is the idea of, I am feeling something because I'm aware of what you might be feeling. But I want to kind of separate this conversation a little bit from empathy and compassion and talk more about just the sense of emotion that some people feel. There will be people listening today, you might be one of them, and you are aware that emotions feel big for you. You know, some people use this phrase with toddlers these days, like, oh, this toddler's feeling big feelings today. I am 45 and feel big feelings, and I can feel the whole range of them quite easily. And I think so much of society puts things into extremes. We have people who say, oh, let it all out, emotions are amazing, feel what you want to feel, vent everything, don't show any kind of control over it, that's the answer. And then there'll be other environments, probably certain families are designed this way perhaps, but also workplaces and professional environments where strength is all about not showing emotion. Strength is about being analytical. Strength is about being a rational thinker or a data-driven thinker. Now, that is a strength. It totally is a strength. But it is not a strength that is in competition with people who are strong because they feel. And I think sometimes we go into these two categories of either some sort of like ridiculous, feel whatever you want to feel and let your feelings guide everything, or actually, professionalism and strength and being in control is to not have emotions in these situations. And I want to try and help us today to find a middle ground, something that is about leveraging this as a part of who we are and being at peace with the fact that you might be designed this way. So let's have a bit of a reframe around this and understand where the problems can come if we don't get it right. There are many times where I have felt that I am too emotional or too sensitive. And there are many times where I have picked up from other people that it feels lesser. Now, to be fair on those individuals, it might just be that they don't understand it or I haven't expressed it in a helpful way. But there are certain environments where you may feel that this sort of feeling your emotions isn't a good idea. Sometimes when life has been difficult, I have wanted to be able to turn the tap off. I don't know whether you're listening and you feel like that. You think, I just wish I could turn it off at the moment. I want to feel this less. I don't want to feel as sad about this or as moved by this. I work with people who are more emotional than I am, and when they read the news or they hear other people's stories, it deeply affects them and it affects their peace. In fact, I'm thinking of a friend of mine, Ruby, who she knows that she's so emotionally sensitive that actually she carries it like a burden at times for other people. And that can actually feel like this sense of emotion is nothing more than a burden. It's not something that's good for me. It's just actually taking away my ability to feel other things. And then there may be others of you who have just picked up that it's seen as a lesser type of behaviour than that sort of analytical thinking that I mentioned before. You know, what we need to understand when it comes to that is that we need to make the best decisions. We need data, we need logic, we need time to think clearly, and we need to pay attention to our intuition and our emotions. I gave an example actually in a workshop yesterday. We were talking about this. The reason we were talking about it is I was with a group of people that were incredibly analytical. I use Clifton Strengths, and so everybody in the room, bar one, on their strengths profile had analytical as a strength. Then one of the people in the group had empathy as a strength, and she was quite a feeling individual. And so I was recognising that for her, she was in an environment where clear thinking, rational thinking, data-driven thinking was king. And so we were having a conversation around how the best decisions are actually made when both of these things come into play. Let me give an example of like buying a house. If I was going to buy a house, you would go through a process of thinking, these are some things that we need to consider rationally. We need to think about location. We need to think about our budget. We need to think about some non-negotiables that we would like in our home that are the right things for us, you know, bedrooms or certain criteria you might have about a garden or a garage or other things that people have on their list. Those are some rational things to consider, and obviously the budget that you've got. But you could go into a house that meets all of that criteria and it not feel like it's going to be a home for you. And there isn't this sense of connection. There isn't this sense of, yes, this is a deeply personal decision where I've got to imagine my life here and I've got to feel a sense of intuition about it. Now, on the flip side, if you are totally led by your emotion, you could go into something and think, oh, this could be amazing. We could do a brilliant job on this house, and it's a total wreck. You know, maybe it's a massive project and your heart gets carried away with the idea of this place. But you haven't done the rational thinking of, have we got the time to do this? Have we got the money to do this? How much harder is this actually going to be than my emotions feel right now in this sense of excitement and feeling like this is our home? And the best decisions come when both of those things come together. It's the same as when we choose who we're going to spend the rest of our life with. It's full of emotion, that decision. But there is also a place for a little bit of actual thinking, like, are we aligned? Do we are our values aligned? Do we want the same things from our life? And sometimes people walk away from relationships where there is a depth of emotion because they know actually their lives want to go in very different directions, and there's a bit of rational thinking that has to come in. On the flip side, we don't marry someone because we've got a tick box list that perfectly matches up with who they are. In fact, that would be a really unhelpful way to go through that process. So what I'm trying to say here in all of this is that, and as I was trying to say to that team, is we make the best decisions when there is space and scope for both of those things to take place. I've worked with loads of doctors who have told me stories of how obviously they get all the data and the analysis from all the testing and all the analytics that they get when they're trying to figure out what's wrong with somebody. But they also use an intuition at times that might lead them towards a decision or further tests because they just think something's not right. And they haven't yet got any evidence for that, but their intuition, their emotions are guiding them. So we've got to learn to find space for both of these things. Okay, and find a way to make these things come together and to help each other find a way to work together. And this idea of being too emotional, the only time I think that would be appropriate to say is when we do not feel that we can harness the power of our emotions and they are overwhelming us. But a person being emotional is a weakness, and logic and rationality being the strength is something I really want to drum home today is such an unhelpful dichotomy. Being logical and rational is a strength. Having a sense of emotion is a strength. And I guess as you're listening to this, I wonder what you have in your own workplace. Where is the bias where you are? Do you feel like some people, you're listening to this and you feel like, actually, I work somewhere where emotion is king and being rational is on the outside? Or maybe you work somewhere where you feel that sort of sense of emotion is really seen as inappropriate. Actually, it's just definitely flawed as a narrative to say that logic and rationality is king, because actually so much data shows us that sensitive people are a really important part of our leadership profile. Apparently, highly sensitive people, or HSPs as they're known, I think I'm one of those. I think I've never done a test. I don't know what makes you highly sensitive, but I reckon I would come into that. It's about 20% of the population, and they bring, particularly leaning into creativity, depth, and intuition. And so that is a whole lens of the way you see things that is really important to understand. I don't play musical instruments very much anymore. But one of the things that I recognise by having been, I just don't have the time, not because I don't want to, but I play the piano, I play the flute, I used to play the saxophone. And as a musician, I recognise that you can be technically good at playing music. And in fact, my eldest son was technically really quite good at the guitar. But when you have a natural sense of emotion, that changes the way you play. And probably my greatest strength as a musician was the fact that I could really feel what I was playing. And so that is a direct way that being emotional helps take something from the sort of, this is, you're playing this perfectly, to being, I am feeling what I am playing. So imagine that in your life phase. It doesn't have to be about music, but that idea of bringing like another colour to the palette that makes it more full, more rich, more alive, more the whole of who we are. And actually, if you are an emotional leader, you are likely to be, if you can harness this and it's not out of control, you'll be able to build a team that has high trust, high connection, and high psychological safety. Psychological safety is this phrase that's being bandied around, but I think it's a really important one. It's when we feel a sense of emotional and intuitive and psychological security in the place that we are. And to be honest, I really know very, very acutely what it feels like to be in a place that's psychologically unsafe. I've got significant personal story of being in situations that are psychologically unsafe, and you do not know what the game is. You do not know where you're going next. That is an abuse of either an emotional person or also somebody who's rational and able to be manipulative. And people who are emotionally aware can create really psychologically safe places. People want to be understood. And being able to bring the emotional side into things means that you realise who the person is who's in front of you, and you realise what they have and what they bring. So what I'm trying to say here is that emotional intelligence, as well as all other types of intelligence, have a place. They are not better and they are not worse. This is not a competition. This is not about saying, be this, you need to be this, otherwise you're failing. But what I want to do today is just speak up for those people that feel deeply and particularly feel that as a weakness. I want you to see it differently. There are times when what we feel is unhelpful. So I just kind of want to mention that for a minute, and then I want to tell you why it is important to express what we feel at the right time. In fact, let's start there. It is important that we express what we feel. It's crucial that we do not contain our emotions. Now, how you express what you feel, you need to work out what that is. But I read a brilliant book called Burnout a few years ago by, I hope I'm not going to say her name wrong, I think it's Emily Nagoski. I've said that from memory, so apologies if it's wrong. We'll put it in the show notes. And the best thing about this book was explaining the stress cycle. When we are in stress, our body is producing all kinds of hormones and cortisol that is and adrenaline and all of this stuff that encourages us to look after ourselves. As if there's a bear coming after me in the woods and my body does what it needs to do. You know how you can run in a way you never think you could when you think someone's following you. One time I remember going out for a run and it got darker than I thought it was, and I've never run so fast in my entire life. And so that feeling of a little bit of stress, pushes us to do the thing that needs to happen. So imagine you're in a high stress situation and all these hormones and are being fired around our body. Now, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, it would have literally been something like hunting or a hunting situation or a high stakes environment. And therefore, what would then happen is the stress cycle would close. Now, the problem is in this book they talk about is that we are constantly living in this stress cycle throughout our day, every day, round and round and round and round. And we are losing the skill of closing the stress cycle. And one of the best things I took from this book was some simple strategies on how we give our body the signal that we are closing the stress cycle. Now, that could be some simple ways to do that is to activate your vagus nerve, which is this nerve that's in your runs from the back of your brain into your body. You can do that by gargling or singing or laughing. That's a really good thing to do. That's why singing is so good for you. Another way you can close the stress cycle is to have sex. I just accidentally said that I was going to say the sex cycle, but it's the stress cycle. That's another way. Dancing, physical exercise of all kinds, all of that helps you close the stress cycle. But one really good inbuilt way is to cry. One of the reason we feel better after a cry, most of us, apart from if it's one of those really bad cries that never ends, it's because it does reduce stress. And it's this thing that our body has within it to say, right, let's close this off. And if we don't do that, we end up being dysregulated and we behave in a way that's not good. Like when I'm snappy with someone and it's nothing to do with the situation, it's because I'm stressed inside and I'm not in touch with my emotions. We need our inside emotions and our outside emotions to be matching. And so when we pay attention to them, we can bring alignment. So when I know I'm really annoyed about something or this is making me emotional, I've got to align how I'm feeling inside and outside, deal with that and bring it back into a place of balance again. And that could be crying, it could be laughing, it could be any of those other things that I've mentioned. Also physical touch. Apparently, if we have a hug, I think it's about 10 seconds it has to last. That's another really good thing that we can do. That some of you are going, oh my gosh, I don't want a 10-second hug from anybody. Don't do it if it doesn't work for you. Now, the other thing is there are times when emotional expression is really wrong time, wrong place, especially when you're with people that you don't know so well or you're in a professional situation where it's just not appropriate. There was a time for me a while ago where I was leading a group of people. It was actually all a group of men, and they were actually some really rude people in the room. I'm not going to dress it up in any other way. There were a couple of really rude men and a couple who were then passive and allowed that to happen. And I felt in the minority. I also felt a lack of power and agency in the situation, a lack of advocates. And because of my nature, I could feel that I was getting upset. Now, I am more than able to fight my corner, and in many situations I will definitely speak back and hold my ground. But this felt more like it was making me feel hurt and making me feel a bit ashamed rather than making me feel a sense of I want to fight back. And in that moment when that happened, I could feel that I wanted to cry. As simple as that. I just wanted to cry and I could feel it rising within me, this desire to cry and to let everything out. And of course, that would have been really not a good idea. I was there to lead a workshop to a group of professionals who, by the way, were not acting professionally, but I was going to be professional. And it's one of those moments where you have got to find a way to pull yourself together, actually. It's literally pull yourself together. And I needed to. Now, the strategy that I used in that moment is that I thought about my strengths and talents as a group of almost like volume knobs in like a mixing desk inside of me. I literally did this, okay? And I thought about my emotional sensitivity and I thought, you need to pull this mixing desk dial down right now. It's unhelpful. This is not the moment. And I thought about some of my other strengths and talents. I thought about the fact that I'm a good communicator. I thought about the fact that I have a really deep internal value that I do a good job. I also thought about the fact that for me, it's really important that when other people go low, I will do my best to go high. And I had like this internal conversation with myself and thought, those are the things that right now I need to absolutely turn the volume up on. And I got through the rest of the session. I did my absolute best job that I could. I remained professional. I lived up to these other parts of who I was. And then I did what I needed to do. I got in the car and I sat in the car and I had a really good process with myself. I actually cried. on the way home. I cried for probably quite a few minutes. I cried about how it had made me feel, and I let all of that emotion out and decided that these people didn't need any more room in my mind or in my thinking. And that was an example where I actually managed to control my emotional sensitivity. I've got loads of examples of when I haven't, by the way. But I want to be helpful today and say it's possible and that you can. So if you are somebody who can sometimes think, I just don't know what to do with myself, give yourself a moment. I can remember another time in a previous workplace where it was a really highly intense leadership meeting. And something was said across the room at me really directly that was tough. And one of my colleagues, like under the table, I remember she like touched my leg under the table as if to say, it's okay. But all I was thinking is, I'm going to get really upset. And in that moment, I had to just go and leave the room for a little bit and gather myself and come back together. Because not everybody deserves to see your emotional expression, and it's not appropriate in every space, which is why I'm saying let it all out everywhere, every time. That is not helpful either. We need to be people who are able to be in balance without losing who we are. But it is so important that you don't try to be somebody that you're not, or to not bring emotion into the way you lead, the way you think, and the way you build relationships, if that's who you are. I've been watching a show called Severance. I don't know if you're not, oh my goodness me, it is unbelievable. Don't worry, there'll be no spoilers. But the concept of the show is that you have this procedure done in your brain, which means that when you are at work, you can't remember anything about your home or your life. And when you are in your home life, you do not have any remembrance of anything you do at work. And if you turn a switch and pretend you aren't an emotional person, and you are putting yourself into a state of severance. And that is going to make you unwell. It is not good for you. It is not helpful to shut off a part of who you are to fit an expectation. That doesn't mean it runs riot and it causes havoc in your life, but that is not helpful. I worked with an amazing young doctor who had done exactly that, and she was literally feeling severed inside. She had had a horrible experience where she was working in casualty, and they lost a patient in a really traumatic set of circumstances. It was very upsetting. Like it was one of those things that wasn't expected, and everything escalated for this patient. And she was deeply affected and, physically affected by what happened. And it was traumatic in every sense of the word. And she had a consultant that was looking after her. Looking after her is not the words I'd use. Who was supervising her, who could see that she was upset and essentially just said, toughen up. You're going to see this again. Deal with it. And would you know what she did? That's exactly what she did. She toughened up. And she decided that she would no longer feel. Now, I had a session with her about a year after that event, and I'd worked with her previously. And I said, "What is going on for you?" And together we realised that she had shut off a part of who she was, severed part of who she was, because she was told it was inappropriate. Do you know what she needed in that moment? She needed somebody to say, "You need some time you need to go and process this with somebody. You need to step away. You need to hear that this is totally valid for you to feel emotional about the loss of a patient in a traumatic circumstance. Yes, you're going to have strategies to deal with this. Yes, you're going to have to close the stress cycle, all those things I've just said. But to tell someone not to feel when something like that has happened is dangerous, it is wrong, and there is no place for it." She actually decided to have counselling and to unpick some of what had happened and to try and get back to medicine, finding a place for the emotions that she feels. She was a very professional woman, but she couldn't just let those things go. That was just not going to work for who she was. So suppressing our emotion and people-pleasing or avoiding conflict or fear of vulnerability, none of that is going to work for you. It will just make you feel severed inside. So I hope that analogy helps you understand why this is so important and why we need, by the way, to be providing adequate supervision to people who are involved in safeguarding, people who are involved in medicine, so that they have a place to close the stress cycle and continue to be healthy and do the things that they do in our society. That's really important. We all need those places. So we need to let our insides match our outsides, and we need to find ways to do that. And as we kind of close today, I just want to say, you don't have to be like anyone else to be effective. If you have been made to feel emotions, do not apologize for that. Learn to do it in a way that's healthy for you, that isn't out of control for you, but it is not lesser to feel things. It is not lesser for me to feel close to an emotion or to even feel like I could cry over something that isn't going to move someone else. That is not lesser, it is equal. It is also not better than somebody who is very analytical. And I love analytical, rational people, and I really want you to hear that. But you're not better than me, and I'm not better than you. If you feel like your emotions are currently holding you back, I would encourage you to think about practices that can help you regulate. Think about things that help you have emotional space so that they do not overwhelm you. That is not the goal. And think about what is one step you can do to get your emotions into a more healthy place today. So just to reiterate, the world doesn't need you to be less emotional. The world needs you to use your emotions well. I want to ask you to think about how can you embrace your emotions and not resist them this week? What does it look like? And I would encourage you to share your thoughts on this. If this has resonated with you, if it's made you feel a bit more seen, please drop a comment. Please get in touch with us. You can always just email at, I think it's podcast@hellosidekick.co, or please leave us a review on any of the podcast sites or on YouTube. Honestly, it really does make a difference. If you've got a feeling friend or a feeling colleague, maybe you could send them this episode and let them feel appreciated and seen today. Have a great week.